Just 2 months after Nothing dropped the super competitive Phone 3A, they followed it up with the CMF Phone 2 Pro. And while seeing Pro slapped into anything nowadays is kinda tiring, this CMF phone might already be our favorite budget pick of the year. The thing is, the 3A was already a killer budget phone. So the question is, which one's really worth your money? We're diving into design, display, performance, cameras, and battery to see if that extra $100 for the Nothing actually makes a difference. Hey, I'm Olive, your host here at Versus.com. Alright, the design on these two couldn't be bolder. The CMF Phone 2 Pro goes for a matte plastic unibody with a two-tone finish on the back. It also has these screws so you can swap the backplate, plus this accessory point where you can attach things like a lanyard. The Nothing, on the other hand, has a matte plastic frame and a see-through glass back, showing off a pattern that mimics ribbon cables and circuits. Plus, it comes with those funky glyph lights. The CMF's got this robot-looking camera setup, while the Nothing kinda looks like it swallowed a tiny Pixel 7 Pro. In terms of weight, the CMF comes in at 186 grams, while the Nothing is a bit heavier at 203 grams. For protection, the CMF has an IP54 rating and the Nothing IP64, both on the lower end, meaning they're only safe from water splashes. So no Nirvana Nevermind album reenactments with these. So as always, let's check in with the team and see who likes which design best.
The Nothing phone.
The CMF.
The CMF.
The Nothing phone.
The Nothing phone.
The Nothing phone. What about you?
I'd say the same. But now, let's check out the displays. Both phones come with identical flat 6.77-inch AMOLED displays, rocking a 120Hz refresh rate. In our screen luminance test under simulated sunlight at 100,000 lux, we measured typical high brightness on a full white screen. The CMF hit 1,408 nits, while the Nothing reached 1,422. Both screens are plenty bright for using outdoors. For security, both use under-display optical fingerprint scanners. For more screen specs, including our measured peak brightness, feel free to pause the video right here. So you basically get the same screen on both phones, and that's a good thing. You get all the benefits of the Nothing display on the cheaper CMF, these being bright sharp panels with slim bezels all around. But now, let's check out the speakers on these phones. The CMF has just one speaker at the bottom, while the Nothing gives you two, one at the bottom and one built into the earpiece. Take a listen. As you can hear, the second speaker on the Nothing really makes a difference. The audio's fuller, louder, and packs way more bass compared to the CMF. But now, let's check out those cameras. Both phones come with 50-megapixel main cameras. Outdoors, both deliver pretty similar results, but if you look closely, the Nothing has a bit more contrast and gives you more natural background blur. Indoors, the CMF delivers more true-to-life colors and balanced contrast. The Nothing, on the other hand, cranks up the contrast and saturation. For ultra-wide, both phones are rocking identical 8-megapixel cameras. Outdoors shots, the CMF tends to go warmer and makes highlights look kinda flat. The Nothing leans cold, but it's closer to how things actually look. Indoors, both phones boost contrast and saturation, pretty different from what you get with the main cams. But again, the CMF struggles with highlight detail, just like in the outdoor shots. Switching to portrait mode with the main lens, edge detection on the CMF is noticeably rougher. Edge detection and colors on the Nothing just look better overall. Using the 2x telephoto for portrait, both phones lift the blacks a bit too much. However, edge detection is more on par this time, both doing a good job. For video with the main cam, both phones can shoot up to 4K 30 FPS. Just like with photos, the CMF, while not amazing, gives you a more natural look. The Nothing goes heavy on contrast again, and for some reason has pretty aggressive focus hunting. As for video with the ultra-wide camera, both are capped at 1080p 60 FPS. That said, we always always record at 30 FPS to keep things fair. Just like with the main cam, the Nothing pushes way more contrast in video, sometimes crushing the shadows, but it does a better job handling highlights, something the CMF still struggles with. Up front, the CMF has a 16 megapixel lens while the Nothing packs a 32 megapixel one. Both shots look pretty similar at first glance, but the Nothing definitely has more detail. Interestingly though, the CMF gives you more natural background bokeh. In low light, once again, the Nothing captures way more detail than the CMF, and it also handles colors more realistically in this tricky scene. For front camera video, both phones are capped at a pretty limited 1080p 30 FPS. Honestly, both videos are kinda underwhelming. The CMF smooths things out a lot, but at least handles dynamic range well. The Nothing, on the other hand, is way too sharpened and contrasty, and it easily blows out highlights. So now let's test out the audio coming from both of these devices. We're gonna start off with the CMF phone. I'm in a pretty busy area, so what do you think? How is it handling the noise? Moving on to the Nothing phone. Doesn't sound any better than the CMF phone. What do you guys think? As always, let's talk about it. Alright, the noise cancellation on both of these phones is pretty shivering. The background noise and wind easily draws my voice. There's definitely room for improvement here. Now, for zoom, both phones have 50 megapixel cameras with 2x optical zoom, but they're actually different lenses and sensors. At optical zoom levels, the CMF actually shows a bit more sharpness and shows less noise in slightly darker areas. This becomes even more obvious at 5x, where the Nothing starts to get pretty blurry. At 10x, both drop heavily in quality, especially when capturing busy scenes like this. The CMF maxes out at 20x and the Nothing goes up to 30x, but at those levels, the photos are only really useful if you're just being lazy trying to read something from afar. We've all been there. Finally, here's a crop to 30x zoom in both phones. All in all, the telephoto lenses do fine at low zoom levels, but once you go past 5x, things start getting pretty blurry on both. Now in low light with the main lens, the CMF delivers brighter shots, but the Nothing does control highlights better, though it looks a bit over-sharpened. With the ultra-wide lenses, both have similar colors, but this time the CMF is overly smooth, losing a lot of detail in multiple areas like in the floor. In portrait mode, we get very different colors on these shots, with the CMF being slightly more realistic. It also captures more detail compared to the Nothing. With the telephoto lenses, the CMF absolutely fails to focus on me, and while the Nothing is a bit too dark, at least it manages to get me kinda sharp. In video with the main cam, the Nothing once again delivers pretty saturated footage, while the CMF looks overly smoothened. That said, both phones struggle with inconsistent auto exposure. Switch to the ultra-wide lens and it's even more obvious. The Nothing cranks saturation and contrast up to 11, while the CMF's exposure goes completely off the rails. So interestingly, even though the CMF is the cheaper phone here, it usually delivers slightly more natural looking photos and videos, especially with the main cam, which is probably the one you'll use the most. However, at night, both phones could use some software tweaks. So that wraps up cameras. Now let's fire up some apps and check out the performance. CMF runs on the MediaTek Dimensity 7300 Pro, while the Nothing is powered by the Snapdragon 7S Gen 3. Both of our units have 8GB of RAM. And good news, the CMF Phone 2 Pro now has NFC for mobile payments. Here are other RAM and storage options available, but they might vary depending on the market. Let's move on and put these phones through their paces in some real-world scenarios, starting with gaming. In Grid Autosport, we modified the preferences file to unlock 60 FPS as the game is capped at 30 FPS by default in graphics mode. Both phones started strong at around 60 FPS, but after 20 minutes, the CMF actually held up better, only dropping to 52 FPS. That said, both got equally toasty, hitting 46 degrees Celsius. Next, we launched Wuthering Waves and cranked the graphics all the way up. Both phones started at 60 FPS, but this time the Nothing was more stable, only dropping to 30 FPS. It did get noticeably hotter though, reaching 49 degrees Celsius. Then we fired up Bloons TD6 and flooded the screen with thousands of units to really stress the CPUs. Both phones dropped to just 3 FPS under load, but the CMF ran a bit hotter, hitting 42 degrees Celsius. Moving on, we exported 99 photos in Lightroom. The Nothing, while a bit slow, finished in 9 minutes and 43 seconds, while the CMF took almost 12 minutes. Next up, we rendered a 3-minute 4K 30 FPS video in CapCut. Both phones performed pretty similarly here, with the Nothing finishing just 3 seconds seconds ahead of the CMF at 1 minute and 7 seconds. For fun, we also opened a massive Microsoft Excel file with over 4 million cells. This time, the CMF was actually faster, beating the Nothing by 5 seconds. Now, let's jump into some benchmarks. In Geekbench 6, the Nothing scored higher in single-core, but it was only about a 100-point difference. In multi-core, the Nothing still came out on top, but again, the gap wasn't all that big. In 3D Mark's Wildlife Extreme Stress Test, both phones showed really good stability, but that's mostly because their performance was just kinda okay to begin with, their scores remaining almost unchanged between the highest and lowest loop. In Antutu, the Nothing really pulled way ahead, scoring over 800,000 points and leaving the CMF quite a bit behind. Lastly, we ran the cross-platform disk check benchmark to measure read and write speeds. Even though both use UFS 2.2, the Nothing outperformed the CMF across the board, which should translate to smoother day-to-day use. So, all in all, both phones actually deliver pretty similar performance. Sure, the CMF scores lower in benchmarks, but when it comes to gaming and real-life use, the difference isn't really noticeable. Now, moving on to the software side of things, the CMF is already running Nothing OS 3.2, while the Nothing phone is still on 3.1. Both are based on Android 15 though. CMF/Nothing promises 3 years of OS updates and 6 years of security updates for both devices, which is alright, but could definitely be better. Nothing OS is pretty clean, and just like the phone's design, it's not afraid to be different. You get a bunch of widget options, plus a super customizable default launcher, which supports icon packs. One of the standout features on both phones is the Essential Space, which you activate with this key on the side. Nothing calls it your second memory. Basically, you can save anything you see on screen, add written or voice notes, and the app uses AI to sort and highlight key stuff from your shots. And of course, on the Phone 3a, you get these glyph lights, which light up for calls, notifications, or even when you're playing music. But now let's move on to our last category, battery and pricing. Battery is another component these phones share, both packing a 5000 mAh cell. For wired charging, the CMF supports up to 33 watts, while the Nothing is faster at 50 watts. Neither phone supports wireless charging though. During our testing, both phones drained at nearly the same rate, both sitting around 60% after all our performance tests, so the difference in chipsets doesn't really have much impact on battery life. In our charging test with a 100 watts charger, the Nothing phone filled up in 58 minutes, hitting a max speed of 45 watts, pretty much what we expected. The CMF wasn't far behind though, finishing in 1 hour and 7 minutes with a peak of 27 watts. As for prices, the CMF Phone 2 Pro comes in at $279, while the Nothing Phone 3a will set you back $379. Like we said at the start, it's just a $100 difference, and honestly, for the price of the Nothing Phone 3a, you could grab the CMF Phone 2 Pro and a pair of CMF Ear A earbuds, or the CMF Phone Plus 476 Lego pieces, your call. Putting it all together, we've got two solid phones here. But to answer the question from the beginning, no, we don't think the extra $100 for the Nothing Phone 3a is really worth it. The CMF Phone 2 Pro delivers great performance and battery life for just $279. Sure, you'll have to live with that bold design, but honestly, in a world full of boring phones, standing out isn't such a bad thing. If you're curious how the Nothing Phone 3a Pro stacks up against the Galaxy A56 and the OnePlus Nord 4, hit that link right here. And of course, a link to these two devices can be found in the description below. Before you go, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and hit subscribe, as we're always testing new devices to help you make the best choice. We'll see you in our next video, and until then, take care.